threat of occupation looms over yet another region of Ukraine. The occupiers may launch a large-scale offensive. Military analysts predict that the Kremlin plans to complete its operation in Donbas by November 21st. If the strategic belt of Slovyansk-Kostiantynivka falls, 2 more regions will be at risk. Meanwhile, former commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Ukraine, Valery Zaluzhny, states Russia is not preparing to end the war, but on the contrary, for a prolonged confrontation. Watch all this next. This is TSN.ua News with you. I am Alina Turishan. Subscribe to our channel, give us a like, and let's get started. A large-scale offensive by Russian occupiers may unfold in the Zaporizhzhia direction. Military expert Oleg Zhdanov warns about this in a comment to TSN.ua. According to him, this region is one of the most vulnerable in the country. Russia critically needs a foothold on the right bank of the Dnipro. And in this regard, Zaporizhzhia region is the weakest, the expert explains. The former reservoir has dried up, 3 years have passed. Young trees have absorbed the moisture and now heavy equipment can pass through there. The Dnipro River here is shallow and narrow, which makes it easier for the enemy to advance. The expert emphasizes, while defending Pokrovsk, Ukrainian forces cannot afford to lose Zaporizhzhia. This is a reminder of the region's strategic importance and the danger that looms over it right now. The situation at the front is not catastrophic, but the tension remains high. According to military expert Alexei Hetman, Russian forces are concentrating their main attacks in the Pokrovsk direction. The enemy is constantly trying to advance, but so far their attacks are limited to small areas, where Ukrainian units promptly repel them. The expert says that the offensive in the Zaporizhzhia direction has been ongoing since the summer, and according to the occupiers' plans, the fighting could drag on until the summer of 2026. Some enemy advances are possible, but as for a collapse of the front, he says, that is not being discussed. Over the past 6 months, the average number of combat engagements and the Russian personnel involved have remained stable, about 150 contacts per day. However, Hetman predicts an increase in the intensity of fighting in the coming weeks, since, according to him, Putin has set the goal of completing the operation in Donbas by November 21st. In the key directions, Pokrovsk, Mirnohrad, Kostiantynivka, and possibly others, an intensification of attacks can be expected, where the enemy will throw all available forces into battle. This means that Ukrainian troops are facing constant pressure, but are able to repel attacks and hold the front line. And every day, the fighting takes place at the limit of maximum tension. In turn, military expert Oleg Zhdanov also says that there is no sign of catastrophe at the front. The problems are indeed serious, but not yet hopeless. In his assessment, Russia's main advantage lies in manpower and in the air. Air parity has not yet been achieved, so the enemy is able to destroy positions with artillery strikes and then finish them off with sheer numbers of infantry where only craters and ruined fortifications remain. The expert sees part of the problem in miscalculations and the command and control system, which complicates the coordination of defense. The current hotspots, especially the Pokrovsk direction, are where the concentration of enemy efforts poses a real threat to Donetsk region. According to the expert, Dnipropetrovsk region does not currently appear to be under direct threat, and the Russians do not have enough forces to launch a powerful offensive against Kharkiv at the same time. Their main efforts in the northeast are aimed at creating a buffer from Vovchansk to Kupiansk. Zhdanov still considers Zaporizhzhia region to be the most vulnerable. I would add that due to the worsening security situation, the evacuation of children from 5 settlements has already begun there. Most likely this is only the initial stage, and later the evacuation may cover other settlements located near the front line. At the same time, Zhdanov notes that the Russians do not have unlimited reserves. Some of their plans are already failing. According to him, there are disruptions in mobilization and even problems with fuel in some divisions. Equipment is breaking down, and people left without vehicles are being thrown into the infantry. The vulnerability of the enemy's production base is also significant. Attacks on chemical plants may slow down ammunition production, even though this is being done late. According to his forecast, Russia intends to keep going, but at the same time, Ukraine has a real chance to hold back the offensive if it manages to keep up the pressure on the enemy's logistics and resources. Zhdanov suggests that closer to the spring of 2026, Moscow may seek a negotiation pause due to resource exhaustion. Let me remind you, just recently, the commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Ukraine, Oleksandr Syrsky, told the New York Post in an interview that the enemy is conducting a strategic offensive operation with the aim of breaking through Ukrainian defenses and taking control of the entire Donetsk region. And the Institute for the Study of War wrote back in the summer of 25, if the Donetsk region falls, it will open an easy path for the Russians to advance on Kharkiv and Dnipro. Over the years since 2014, a continuous defensive line has been built in this area. Several large cities, along with a number of towns and villages, have turned into a kind of belt of fortresses stretching along the H20 highway from Kostiantynivka to Slovyansk. This defensive strip stretches for about 50 kilometers and provided the Ukrainian defense with a strong foothold. If the enemy breaks through this line and reaches the northern areas of Donetsk region, they will gain a favorable starting position for further advances to the north and west. In such a scenario, there would be significantly fewer natural barriers on the way to Kharkiv and Dnipro. There are almost no large water obstacles or dense urban development, which previously served as natural fortifications and made it difficult for the enemy to advance. In other words, defending this belt of fortresses is not just a local fight for the cities, but a key line that keeps a much broader region under control. After the capture of Pokrovsk and Mirnohrad, the next target could be Kostiantynivka itself. There, the enemy is already working on approaches to the defense, conducting assault operations on the outskirts and advancing toward Chasiv Yar. This was reported by Roman Pohorily, co-founder of Deep State, on his YouTube channel. At the same time, the enemy is probing Lyman, with movements recorded on its eastern outskirts and active operations in the forested areas. These operations are aimed at undermining logistics in the Lyman area. If the enemy manages to take Lyman, they will be able to deploy strike assets, including drones, to control the transport routes to Slovyansk, thereby cutting off logistics for the Ukrainian defense forces. A soldier from Aidar, Stanislav Bunyato, call sign Usman, writes that in the Lyman direction, with the onset of bad weather and fog, enemy activity is already gradually increasing. The infantry is active around the clock, trying to bypass key settlements on the flanks, while enemy UAV crews are working to increase flight distances, monitor Ukrainian logistics routes, and approaches to Lyman. Constant reinforcement of enemy units with reserves allows them to maintain their pace. Ukraine's ambassador to the United Kingdom, Valery Zaluzhny, predicts that Russia is set on a prolonged war, and therefore Ukraine needs a strategic shift to move beyond a strategy of attrition and implement a broader action plan based on technology and innovation. Zaluzhny notes that the Kremlin is not planning to end the war but is preparing for a prolonged confrontation. In his opinion, the fatigue of Ukrainians, divisions among Western allies, and the restraint of the United States are creating a situation in which time is on Russia's side. Under such conditions, without external pressure or internal upheavals, the Russian leadership will likely continue the war, adapting, maneuvering, and accepting losses in order to achieve its unchanged goals. In addition, he emphasized the importance of unity in confronting the aggressor, developing modern technologies, and fighting corruption in order to ensure the survival of the country and a future for the next generations. Meanwhile, civic activist and volunteer Serhiy Sternenko, in an interview with TSN journalist Natalia Nahornaya, expressed his conviction that the war unleashed by Russia against Ukraine is existential in nature and will continue until one of the states ceases to exist. According to Sternenko's forecast, the conflict could drag on for another 2 or 3 years, and even if the confrontation is temporarily frozen, it will end either with the disappearance of Ukraine or with the transformation or collapse of the Russian Federation. The volunteer emphasized that in the long term, only one side will remain, either Ukraine or Russia in its current imperial form. And what do you think? How much longer could the war last? And how will events on the front line develop further? Write your thoughts under this video and stay with TSN.ua so you don't miss the main news. I'll see you in the next episodes.